Maybe once you come to realize that there are no answers, you learn to live with the questions.
Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks with your hosts, me, Ramya Amudan, and Jacob Szymanski.
Hello.
Hello. We're in studio together today, so that's always fun. And Nisreen Abdelmajid is our trusted technical producer. We started with a quote of the day. Tell us, Jacob. You picked it. You read it.
This one's from My Oxford Year by Julia Whelan. I like this one because it's a lesson that I think we all need to learn, and that sometimes we don't know the answers, and that's fine. That's kind of a literal interpretation of that quote, but I don't think it's deeper than that, but it is very meaningful.
I think so.
I just wish we could talk to the author. I'd like to know more.
Oh my gosh, your wish is our command. Because we've done really well not to tease, over zealously about this, but on the inside, we've been just very, very giddy because we're excited to have one of our very favorite audiobook narrators on with us, Julia Whelan, today on the show. She's an author. She's an audiobook narrator. She's read and narrated over 500 books. She's done so much, not just in the audiobook realm, otherwise as well. Her most recent book, Thank You for Listening, was a Goodreads Choice Awards nominee for Best Romance in 2022. Her debut novel, My Oxford Year, garnered a Society of Voice Arts Award. So there's lots going on. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which I never stop talking about. It's by V.E. Schwab, but narrated by Julia Whelan. Is one of my favorite performances and favorite books that I've read of all times. There's Educated by Tara Westover, Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, and The Witness by Nora Roberts, The Collector by Nora Roberts. These are just a few. The list goes on and on and on. Obviously, if we went through all 500, we'd need another episode. But she narrates her own novels as well. My Oxford Year, Thank You for Listening, being the two that we've read, the book club has read. We have people from the book club joining us on the show all the time, including Amir Khan. So we're going to get talking to her. But Jacob, is there anything else you want to add to kind of preface Julia's work before we get into it?
Listen, 500 hours or 500 books of narration work is pretty insane. Let me just put this in perspective, okay? Using rough numbers, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to say every book, Julia, that you've read was 5 hours. I know that's a lot less, but we're using conservative numbers. That's 2,500 hours of content, roughly. There are 8,760 hours in a year. You're 39 years old, so that means you've been alive for 361,640 hours. With these numbers, we can surmise that you've spent roughly 0.731% of your life in an audio booth.
You went full nerd on this, man. I'm so proud of you.
Welcome.
Does that sound about accurate, Julia? And welcome.
Hi. That was the best introduction I've ever had. That's amazing. And that just goes to show that math doesn't always tell the whole story.
Yeah. Math is subjective.
Right, and those are very
exactly.
conservative numbers.
Yes.
Your audiobooks on average are a lot longer than 5 hours. And
Yes, I was also not narrating pre-verbally, so.
Yeah, we can't average out the 39 years.
Yes.
Right, so there's got to be some of that. Maybe next time we'll come in with a graph, yeah?
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
yeah, that would
an
be great.
audiograph.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I've been doing it about 15 years now. It's kind of been a bell curve where I started with a few titles a year and then was at my height doing about 70 or 80. And now I'm back down to about 5. So it's
5 a year?
At this point, considering everything else that I'm doing, but that's only in this last year. The year before that was about 20. The year before that was about 30. And it's kind of mirrored the beginning of my career here. So I'm not saying it's the end, but I'm just reprioritizing, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of hours.
It's a lot of hours. And you know what? As I said, narration wasn't the start of it for you. You've done more kind of leading up to narration. You're telling us a little bit about how the narration part has been over the last 15 years. But your first high-profile acting role was when you were cast as Grace Manning in ABC's Once and Again. So that was when you were 14. What was it like to transition? I mean, you don't necessarily have to go into the acting parts of it unless you want to, but from acting to narrating, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I've never taken to anything the way I took to this job, where it was the thing that was best suited to my particular skill set and sensibilities. So I loved acting. I've always loved acting. I still do. It's my first love, but it's the rigor of Hollywood and the structures around it, and also being in any way recognizable and famous was just so, it made me ill. I was just not comfortable with giving up my anonymity for this thing that I loved. And it's not like I set out saying, how do I fix that? How do I get to act every day doing things that no one would ever let me do on camera, but also be totally invisible? I could not have designed this job better for me. So the transition was totally accidental, at least at that time, I think. I got into it right after college, and it wasn't really an industry yet. I mean, there was an industry, but it wasn't this juggernaut that it is now. And I think now there's people who actively are like, I want to be an audiobook narrator, and they go into it. But at the time, we all fell backwards into this job. No one knew this was a thing you could do. And so that's what happened with me. I took a break from on camera when I went to college. And when I came back, I thought, okay, well, I'll just start acting again. But the business had changed a lot, and I had changed a lot, and I needed something to pay the bills. And this kind of fell into my lap, and then I went, oh my gosh, this is the best thing I've ever done. I love this so much. That
first gig, do you remember it?
Yeah, sure. Felt? I remember. You always remember your first.
Yeah.
I went to. There was a studio in Michigan. There still is a studio in Michigan, and at that time, no one had home studios. You actually had to go into studio to record. And I was given 2 YA novels. The first one was Need by Carrie Jones, and then as soon as we finished that, I just started in on Peace, Love, and Baby Ducks by Lauren Myracle. And I've said this before, but I think I can credit my career to just the accident of timing, which is that at the time when I was starting, there was this boom in YA, and they needed younger sounding voices. And so I just came in and fulfilled a need. Isn't that funny? The first title, and that was really what it was about.
Like so many things in life, it's the right place, right time. You were just lucky to be a young voice at that time. You have to be thankful, right? Before we move on, I don't think we could live with ourselves if we didn't play a clip of your work while we have you here on the show.
Why not?
Oh, God.
Yeah, here's a clip from my Oxford year.
Okay.
All the breath leaves my body. I can't seem to get it back. So, here's the thing. I'm in England.
Fine, when you get back.
I get back in June. Silence.
Are you consulting over there?
No, I got a Rhodes, and I'm doing a Gavin Chortles.
I was a roadie.
I know, sir.
Gavin.
What
are you studying?
English Language and Literature, 1830 to 1914.
Beat. Why?
Because I want to? Why does it come out as a question?
You don't need it.
Chills.
Okay.
Literal chills.
Let me just get this over with before we turn this into a gush session. Just once. Julia, your narration is so good.
Yep.
That's it.
That's it.
Oh, God.
It's so good. But we can't help but notice that you're cringing at wanting to hear your own voice here.
I know. No one likes the sound of their own voice. No one will listen to their own voice in an outgoing message.
Does it? You kind of put up with it, but
I do. I mean, there's certain. I think I'll say that. Well, first of all, that book is this is just trauma for me because it was the recording process. Well, the recording process was so difficult, which we can probably get into. But I have not listened to that book since I did it. And there are books that I absolutely will listen to that I love, but it's because I love the book and I can kind of divorce myself from listening to myself. It's I'm on a road trip with my husband or friends or something, and I'm like, you need to hear this book. So I'm comfortable with it. I don't relish it.
Okay,
yeah. It's like seeing yourself on camera. I can see myself on TV. I got over that a long time ago. But I don't seek it out.
For some reason, it feels different, though. Seeing yourself versus hearing yourself, at least for me. But and I want to get into that recording process of my Oxford year. But before that, let's go back to just really quickly, go back to that first gig of yours. Because, I mean, obviously, it spun into the next 15 years of your life where where everybody gets you in narration mode. So did it lock in for you that first time around? Did you have this magical moment that people think of when you think, this is it? This is the rest of my life? No.
No.
It's way more realistic.
I mean, I'm an actor. Like, I never think I'm going to work after one job and never work again after a job is over. Like, I just assume that well, that was it. That was nice. Like I said, I had creatively was like, oh, I really like this. This is everything that I like. This is reading and performing and interpretation, and I really, really like this. And I remember thinking, if I could just get like a book a month just to take some of the pressure off of, just LA and paying rent. And like I was tutoring and I was teaching writing, and I was doing, I was picking up screenwriting gigs, and I was picking up whatever, guest star TV stuff would come up. But it was like, if I could have the stability of maybe one book a month, that would be great. And so that was the only goal I think I had after that first session.
One book a month. Not much to ask for. Yeah.
Is that the pace you're going at now? One book a month?
No, I mean, now I don't know. Now it's like I've been writing a book this whole last year, so I was really pushing a lot of work off. And I think also, books are deceptive. It's kind of like what you were doing with the math at the beginning of hours. I think that's really right. Like, we need to start thinking of things as hours, not titles, because even when I was doing 70 books a year, like a lot of those were romance, so they were maybe dual narration. So my sections were maybe 4 hours, as opposed to like I had a whenever I have like a fantasy novel scheduled or something, and it's going to be 20 finished hours, that's 4 books.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about that, because I don't think people often think about the insights under a 5-hour book as we know it when it's on Audible. Mm-hmm. Is it 5 hours of recording?
Right. So no, it's at least 2 to 1 just in the studio.
2 to 1. Wow.
Yeah. So for the purposes of
this
recording,
is coming from a professional.
I tend to be efficient. Like mine can sometimes be like 1.5 to 1. But also just, the breaks. If I'm counting breaks of getting out of the booth and stretching and filling my grumbling stomach and things like that, it's 2 to 1. But then there's all the prep involved, which is reading the book ahead of time and doing all of the research. And that's about another 2 to, so at the end of the day, it's about 4 to 1. So however long the audiobook ends up being, I've spent about 4 times as long on it.
That's huge. That's a lot of time.
And we complain at the price of audiobooks on Audible.
I know.
And this is just the narrator's process. Wow.
I get it. And, and I think that, I mean, I have a lot of problems with the industry and the way that we do this. I don't know why we ever started on a finished hour model, because it's not indicative of the work, because it makes you start selecting projects where if I'm not getting paid for research time and I'm not getting, I'm going to pass on the books that look like they're going to be nightmares to prep, So yeah.
And now you're doing that, but was there a time when you were taking everything that came your way?
Yes, of course. Again, the actor thing I'm talking about. You say yes to everything, and that's how I burned out.
Yeah, that's grueling.
I mean, that's the part where it was about 7 years into the job, I think, where until I realized, I was like, I think I can say no and they'll come back to me the next time.
Oh, wow, yeah.
But it was 7 years. And to be fair, when you're first starting out, I mean, so much of this industry it functions on reliability, which I think a lot of jobs do. But there's this sense of people want to know that if they offer you something, you respond to them, you get back in a timely manner, you get the job done. And if you start saying no too often, they'll move on to the next person because they'll just assume you're not available, right? And so I always say this to people who want to start out, but they also want to keep a day job or they're acting, and they're like, well, yeah, but if I get like a movie, I'm going to leave for 3 months. And I was like, well, yeah, you not really. Like, you can't really do that. Mm-hmm. And then also try to do this full time.
This leads nicely into a question one of our book club members asked for you. This is Amr Khan asking, what does your process for selecting books to narrate look like?
Like I said, I used to just say yes to everything. It's changed now. It's still very much schedule based. That I try, and now I'm just trying not to over schedule myself, and that's been going on since my Oxford year, actually, because I almost had a breakdown trying to write that book while recording, and I told myself that when I wrote my second book, I wouldn't do it under those conditions again. So I limited myself to 2 finished hours a day. And so for me, it's like there's only so much work I can put into that schedule. I obviously prioritize authors that I've done all their books. Like if Taylor has a book out or Emily, like I'm going to prioritize people who I have that standing relationship with. And honestly, if something just comes into my inbox and it looks like something I would want to read, I'm keen to do it. And, it's a very personal thing. Like sometimes I'll just feel like I've done too much romance. I'd love to do a domestic thriller. Or I'm going to pass on something because I just don't want to be there emotionally for however long it takes to record, because that's a real thing too, based on subject matter.
That is fair.
So, yeah.
Do you have time to read outside of reading?
No.
This is your full time and your.
Look, this is changing again because I'm doing fewer books, but I'm now as a writer asked to blurb a lot of books, and I never get to all of those requests. I try, but that doesn't happen very often. And then depending on the projects that I'm writing or working on or producing, like there's always a lot of attendant reading around that for research or so. Every once in a while, I'll be able to squeeze in, 10 minutes before my eyes close at night, just slowly work my way through a book, but it's tough.
Yeah.
My Oxford year was one of the 2 books that you both wrote and narrated or authorated.
Mm-hmm, sure, I like that.
Yeah, we're trying to make it a thing.
Yeah.
Make it a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that it was difficult to record that one. Why was my Oxford year so difficult to record, and what differentiates a book that's easy to narrate and difficult to narrate?
Oh, good question. So this was just a perfect storm of things. First of all, the book, objectively, like if it had come from someone else and it was being offered to me, it would have been difficult because first person present is difficult because everything's immediate and the emotions are very on the surface and you're very in the character's head. So it's really like a 12-hour performance. It's also 1 American and 13 Brits. And just technically flipping between those is challenging. And I worked with an accent coach on that one because I was like, we need to come up with 13 distinct characters. Wow. Like I can't just do my passable like British accent here. I really want a full cast.
We do? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think, so technically, like just objectively, the book was tough. But then I was in that debut author imposter syndrome phase where everything was just kind of happening to me. And I was like, oh, we're recording the audiobook now? Okay. And I would read this and be like, who wrote this? Like, this sentence is terrible. And I would, I was editing as I was going. I could not turn off the editor brain. And so I had a completely different experience of that book in the booth where I was just like, okay, well, that's done. And I've been very pleasantly surprised that people like it.
Oh, it's such a great book. So wait, you're telling us you were legitimately editing the writing as you were narrating? To a certain extent, like I got through about 2 days of doing that. Little stuff like copy edit stuff, line edit stuff. Yeah. And I sent the notes. I would send notes every day to my editor. And finally, after about 2 days, she was like, this is not how we do things. You can't do this anymore. No. Like it's locked. The text is locked. I was like, the privileges of being the authorator.
Yeah, it was. She was like, don't do this. Okay. And I was like, okay, but what about typos? If I find typos, that's okay, right? And she said, yes, but you can't at this point. Like we're past this.
And did they budge at all?
I don't remember. Yeah, I mean, there were some things that were just technically like wrong, like continuity issues were wrong. But in my like, I can improve this sentence. No, they were like, just stop.
Don't do this. Okay, so here's my question then. When you were writing the book, did you not
Think
hear
about audio?
yourself? Yeah, like
You'd
hear
be
yourself in
shocked
it?
to know that I never do that. I cannot,
Really?
even this last thing, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but the thing I've just finished now, which is specifically written for audio, I did not think about how it was going to be in audio until about a week before I recorded. And same thing with Thank You for Listening. And it's because I think the thing to understand about me is like, first and foremost, I'm a writer. And that was always there before this job was there. And so I'm always thinking of a book as a book. That said, part of my editorial process has always been reading things out loud, but not from a performance view, just for like, does this sound musical? Yeah, like, am I repeating words? Are these sentences clunky? Like, that's part of my revision process, but I'm never thinking about performance choices when I'm doing that. I'm more focused on the writing.
That's fascinating to me. I hope you don't mind me saying that, because it sounds like a compartmentalization thing, right? Like, yeah, you're just totally, you finish the book and then you're like, oh, now we got to read it.
Yeah.
And get back into the process. But then while you're in the process of reading or narrating the book you wrote, you're also like, well, can we tweak the writing a little?
Yeah,
going
and it
back
always
to the writer self.
Inevitably what happens is like, as I get to this point where I am getting ready to record or I'm recording or something like that, and then I'm doing someone else's book at the same time or the week before or after or something, I always just have this moment where I sit back and I'm like, God, this is nice. Like, to not even be thinking about the book or the writing, to just be in someone else's hands, just like, good for you. You figured, you wrote a book. You wrote a book.
I love
and like,
that.
all I have to do is read it. This is great.
Yeah. It's like a whole different mode, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, there's something about reading your own books back at yourself that makes you rethink everything, right?
Right?
Yeah. I mean, when I used to direct audiobooks a lot, and I would do some author reads occasionally, and, especially when they're not trained narrators, it always takes people by surprise how difficult it is for a number of reasons. And I think something happens too in the recording process. It's like, for me and for the authors I used to work with, that's sort of the moment when you realize other people are going to be consuming this. And so sometimes, particularly for like memoirs, it can be, that's where you start to feel like overexposed. And it kind of hits, like, the truth finally settles in that other people are going to read this or listen to this.
Yeah, because you're not necessarily actively thinking about that the entire time. I think that would be, sabotaging.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
Male characters, you want to talk a little bit about, everybody has questions about you doing male characters. You do a stellar job. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I know my husband has this joke because he does voice. He has a lovely voice, like a great voice. And he was always the one who would, people would be like, oh my God, can you just say that again? And he's like, no one cares. No one cares. They just want you. They just want you to do your me impression.
Oh, wow.
But I'm very, that also was a learning process. I think when I first started doing it, especially romance, and you'd have these kind of alpha guy, and you want to be as deep as possible, like that's what it is. And I would just kill myself. I would like tear my voice apart to try to go as low as possible, and I would listen back and be like, I don't even hear it. Like, I don't even hear all the effort that went into that. And I think two things happened. One is my natural register just shifted lower as I got older, and as this job put a lot of miles as I clear my throat, sorry. This job put a lot of miles on my voice, so my lower register is more accessible. But I think the main thing is that there was just, in my head, there was a shift where I realized that performance, all that matters is the performance. And like, treat them like I would treat any other character. Just perform them. Don't try to be a guy.
Right.
And I've had this talk, actually I was talking with Romance, my co-narrator, for the next thing, who's a romance like god. And he said, I'm so sick of hearing like people saying I would rather listen to Julia do guy voices than any of the guys. And I was like, it's very simple. I know how to murmur. And I feel like a lot of men, they come to the mic in a very presentational sort of way. And sometimes it can just be like, I'm shouting into your ear hole. And and I was just like, it's a seduction. If that makes, like, I don't know. This is a bad answer to this, but the point is, it's a combination of just feeling like this is a character and I want to do him justice. I want him to feel fully realized and give him as many levels and as much latitude as I would any other character. And yeah, just being sexy, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, not screaming into
Well,
your ear hole.
this is a very specific question, but how do you physically do your male voices?
I don't know. At this point, I don't think anything happens. Like I said, I used to really, and it sounded bad. It sounded like an imitation of something.
Right.
And that's very annoying to me. If I could go back and like bonfire the first, I don't know, 4 years or something of my career when I was trying to do that, that would be great. I would love to do that.
Gosh.
But I mean, yeah, I don't think anything really physically changes. It's just a very accessible part of my range now.
That's cool. But when you're recording, by the way, do you have a director, somebody working with you? Is it just your own process?
Typically, no, there's no director. On very few projects, there's a director.
Okay.
But usually it's just me talking to myself and then uploading the files to an editor who will listen along and send me back any corrections that need to be made. But I don't have any immediate feedback.
And you talked about taking breaks and stretching and eating and all that stuff during studio sessions. Do you know at this point how long you can go before tapping out of a studio session? Or do you say, like, I have to put in 8 hours? And what is 8 hours?
No.
Jeez.
I mean, yeah, I don't, at this point, like I said, I just limit myself to 2 finished hours a day.
Okay.
Unless something's gone wrong, like unless, I've been sick and I've got to make up or catch up or something. But that's my goal. And I usually will take a break. It seems to be about 45 minutes to an hour. I mean, honestly, it's oxygen becomes the problem. Like the booths are so, at least mine is very small. And you just need air at a certain point. Otherwise, I would probably just keep going.
Yeah, because you can't have a ventilator in there. It's going to be
there's
dead
like
quiet.
There's a quote unquote a fan, but
a so-called fan.
Yeah.
Yes, allegedly, but it's feeble.
Because for Jacob and I, who have low vision / are blind, we use a screen reader. And particularly the way I read verbatim is by a screen reader in my ears and then reading out loud. So there is a point where I feel fatigued, like I can't hear things anymore. Like screen reader saying something, but I may as well be just talking gibberish or hearing gibberish. And I wondered if you can experience that fatigue.
Absolutely.
Or if you stop before then because you know when it's going to hit.
I mean, well, again, this is part of the limiting it to 2 finished hours a day. Like I would, when I was, again, doing that kind of volume before, I would sometimes have to do 4 finished hours a day. And then that's when not having a director is a real liability because I'd get to the end of the day and be like, I don't even know what I just said. Like,
Exactly.
where is the emphasis in that sentence?
Yeah.
Like what word am I even trying to hit? Yeah. And so... Yes, for sure. I mean, that's, again, a muscle that you kind of develop. I remember when I was first starting, at the end of the day, I would just be exhausted as if I'd like done something physical. And it's just your eyes and your ears and your brain being like, go lay down. You're done.
We're done. Exactly.
So, yeah.
We're here with Julia Whelan, author, narrator, actress. She's doing a lot. She's telling us all about it. We talked a lot with you, Julia, about your process of recording, a little bit about your career coming into it. Where do you want to go next, Jacob? Do you want to talk about her love for romance or get to a book club question?
Yeah, let's start with the question about the romance genre. I think you have some strong feelings about this genre based on... the fact that you've written 2 romance books, but also thank you for listening. there's one quote that I found pretty interesting. For context, this quote is told from an author in the book, June French, that is the main character's idol, favorite author. It goes, "Of course there should be a happily ever after. I'm so sick of this question. It's a romance. That's the deal we make with our readers. It's misogyny, plain and simple. You don't see anyone telling mystery readers that they're silly and unserious for wanting to know who the murderer was at the end. F off."
Yeah. That kind of says it all, no?
Yes, and more to that, Swanee, the main character, also has strong opinions saying that happily ever afters are unrealistic and that the men in romance novels are fantasy men, as she calls them. And she doesn't say that in a good way. Like,
Right.
and you've written 2 romance books. So my question is, why do you write romance? And what is romance, in your opinion, at its best?
Yeah, I mean, look, I love the genre. It's the one that as we were talking about in terms of elective reading time, it's the one I will always go to. And I mean, part of it was for me, Swanee is sort of like this. She was me maybe 7 years ago, where I was burned out on recording romance. And I was just like, nothing in life is going right. And all I'm dealing with is an aging grandparent and like death and dying. And like, I don't want to, don't give me this, like, we're just going to magically, everything's going to be fine. And, I don't want to hear it. But I think that there's a character in there who says that like, it's romance novels are kind of a leap of faith and that they give you that sense of everything's going to be fine. And sometimes when life isn't, you want that comfort and security and safety. So the denigration of them is something that is incredibly irritating to me. And I mean, it's obviously in line with the way that we denigrate anything that women seem to be interested in. But there's that genre too as a category has like exploded in so many ways, and now there's so many different types. And I still think that people are stuck in this kind of like mid-90s understanding of it, where they only see Fabio on the cover and like that type of book. And now we have everything from, rom-coms, which I guess is sort of what I write in, to, very specific types of kink or different types of relationships, or like it's such a broad category now. And at the end of the day, it is just about being seen by someone and feeling love. And I just don't understand how that needs to be criticized.
Right, like how is that a bad thing?
How is that a bad thing? I mean, people love true crime podcasts or something, and I don't understand that. But like, I'm not out here being like, I don't understand how these people could like think about killers all day. Like, what is wrong with them?
Yeah,
that's
a good point.
So, I think that's my feeling about it. And I wrote the next thing. The third project is a dyed-in-the-wool romance, like a proper. My first 2 books are kind of closed door, and they're rom-coms, but with kind of complicated subject matter. And they're marketed as romances. I didn't write them as romances. That's the way they were. I wrote them as just the novels that they needed to be. But this next one is a proper romance. Although my co-narrator will say it's really more erotic fiction that happens to have an HEA. So I may have also screwed that one up. I don't know. But yeah.
When's it coming out? Do you want to tell us now, or can you?
Yeah. So I'm doing it myself. I'm doing it on my own platform that I just started called Audiobook, which is it's an audio publishing company and app. And I'm doing it as episodes, the way I wrote it. And Thank You for Listening. It's the book within a book from Thank You for Listening. Sorry, I should have said that. It's the book that they're recording in Thank You for Listening, which was a ridiculous premise that would simply not let me go.
Wow.
I created this thing just off the top of my head, which was a second chance romance with a gigolo descended from Casanova. And it was so absurd that I had to try to make it as realistic as possible. And I did. And now I'm like, it's so great.
I thought it was so brilliant that it's like in Thank You for Listening, you're like low-key promoting your next book.
Yeah.
Like accidentally.
Without
I
even
want to know
accidentally.
I want to know what happens in Casanova
You promoted
too.
it so much that you couldn't
I couldn't
not
say
write
no.
it. Yeah.
I was just like, someone should really write this, and I guess it should be me. So the first episode is coming out on Valentine's Day. Actually, it's
fun.
happening
Oh,
fast
fitting.
because I can do it. Again, that was the way it was, and thank you for listening. And it's all a big experiment, but this one I'm doing as a kind of radio drama sort of thing where there's 4 actors on it, and we're doing duet narration.
Now, because we are talking about your writing, put this to rest for us, please. Because in the writer's notes of Thank You for Listening, you tell us that a lot of friends think your novels are memoirs. And you said, no, definitely not. But there are some similarities between you and the main characters. But you do use the term autofiction. So explain what you're saying.
Yeah, so I think maybe I will finally stop being accused of this because I don't think anyone thinks that the second chance romance with a gigolo descended from Casanova is in any way autofiction. I might have actually written a book that has nothing to do with me. Maybe that's why I like it so much.
We'll
but
see.
I think that my Oxford year was a kind of total accident where I was actually, that book came about because I was hired to work on a screenplay that was set in Oxford. It was a kind of love story set in Oxford. And because I had gone to Oxford and I was hired to work on this screenplay, and I ended up falling in love with the story and wanted to change a lot about it. And they were like, the producers were like, well, no, this is the story. But they got to know my opinions and they said, do you think there's a book here? And I said, oh my God, nothing has ever wanted to be a book more. But you've got to let me tell the story that I want to tell. And so that's how that came about, where that was not, for me, that was a book about, it had a lot of my own personal feelings about grief at that time and where I was at in my life. But Ella, to me, I guess this has been the case with both of my heroines. I look back, I think they're me at different stages of my life. So the way that Ella is grappling with what is it that I want to do in life and what is this dream that I've been pursuing my entire life and putting all of my energy toward that, is that still what I want to do? Was about me at her age as opposed to me when I was writing it. And with Thank You for Listening, I think that the sort of life didn't go as planned, very jaded sort of thing, needing to accept that like a chapter of your life is closed. That's Swanee, again, like 5 years prior to to when I was writing the book. So in that way, it's autofiction, in that I think that the subject matter is something I'm very familiar with, and the character's journey is something I'm very familiar with, but I fictionalize liberally.
But you're channeling parts of you, I guess, is fair to say, at different points, at least after you've gone through it so you can reflect back on.
Yeah.
We promised to get to some of the book club questions, and we've only read one so far.
I'm sorry, go.
Yeah, let's move on to that. This question is from Sharon Johnston. It's Sharon. This is so exciting. You are one of my favorite authors / narrators. I would like to ask you what genre of books you like reading and what are some of your favorite books? Sharon.
Oh, man. Well, okay. So, I mean, I think, romance are my go-tos, but my favorite books of all time, I'm kind of all over the map. Like, it's all started with The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle by Avi. And then Persuasion by Jane Austen. Middlemarch by George Eliot, which I wrote about in my Oxford year. And then the list of, honestly, of romance is like way too hard to go down. But for historical, I love Loretta Chase. For contemporary, I really do love Emily Henry. But there's so many.
And what attracts you to those specific books?
Voice. I really do think it comes down to voice. I mean, I think that it's just when an author's take is so clear on the page and you just feel like you're reading a person.
Amr Khan, I mentioned him already. He's a contributor on the show as well as just an avid audiobook worm. So he says, he's sent us a bunch of questions. Let's get to at least a couple. How do you prepare for reading an audiobook? Do you read it first, speak to the author, just go for it? You talked bit about this already, but the author part is interesting. You know, do you experience a lot
I'll
of
go into the
hands-off
research.
authors?
I'll go into the research part of this.
Yeah.
So when I'm reading, I'm keeping 2 lists, and one is a word list of words I don't know how to pronounce, and sometimes they're real words, but sometimes they're author invention. And then I'm keeping a character list with any vocal descriptors that the author may give their characters. And then I've got to compile this like research question, and sometimes I'm put directly in touch with the author, and sometimes it's just working its way through an email chain of like audio producer, back to editor, back to author's agent, back to author, and then trickling all the way back to me. But yeah, with some authors at this point, especially who I have a relationship with, there's kind of like, I mean, Addie LaRue is a very good example where I had not met V before that book, but she really wanted me for that book, and I really wanted to do it justice. And so we got on Skype, and I was like, here are my questions, because I don't know how to do this exactly, so let's figure it out together. Because with that book, it was like, how do I track? Do we want to give her a French accent, first of all? Like, do we want the French characters to sound French when technically she's French, but to an American or English-speaking listener, how's that going to sound? And then we want to soften her accent over time, which would be fine if the book were linear, but because it goes back and forth in 2 timelines, I had kind of like an actor insecurity moment where I was like, people are going to think I can't hold a French accent.
That's fair.
And,
That's a great point.
So fair.
Wow.
And we talked it out, and we decided, you know, just how far I would go on like the strength of it in the beginning to just how light it would be at the end. And then I just had to get my ego out of the way and be like, you know what? I trust the reader. I trust the listener to know what I'm doing here.
And not to mention, like, she already wanted you for the gig. So she was like, yeah, you're it, right? So whatever process you went through, you were the
but I
one
wanted
she
to clear
ideally
that
wanted.
with her. That was not a swing I wanted to take without clarifying with her. Because if she were like, no, I see this as just totally just neutral the whole time, then I would have taken that into consideration.
Right. We actually reviewed that book on this show a couple months ago.
Yeah, I'm a diehard fan.
Yeah, me too.
And if I remember correctly, you perform Addie with just a very, very light French accent, right? If
I mean, at the
correctly,
beginning,
very
in
light.
the Villon sections, she's a French country girl, and everyone around her is French. And when she goes to Paris, everyone's still French. But it starts to. I chose to have it start to lessen when she leaves the geographical borders of France. So when she goes to, I mean, she's in Germany at one point, she like certain, and then by the time she gets to America, it starts really softening.
Okay. Another question from Amir, and I think this has a lot of underlying context. You'll get it. It says, would you consider a trip to Toronto to feature as a setting for one of your future books?
That would be nice.
Of
Julia,
course.
would you? Okay.
Of course, I totally would. I have not actually been to Toronto. It's a
What?
huge failing of mine. I know. I've spent time in
15
Montreal,
years
and I
into your
spent time
career.
in Vancouver, and I've never gone to Toronto.
Oh my gosh. There's
I
going to be
know.
so much beef now within
I
Canada.
know. But I want to.
Okay, good. Soon. She hasn't come
soon.
to Toronto yet.
Yet, but I will.
Question from Ryan Huey. My favorite performance by you is from Bluff. How do you prepare for roles like this one? It seemed like
God,
it was
I love that
fun,
book.
yet very difficult. Is there a
yeah, but-
routine that you
Sorry,
do
I'm
to
talking
get
over you. Sorry.
pumped up?
I'm pumped up. Can you tell how pumped up I am?
Yes.
So, okay, that book is, that's difficult, but in the best way. Like, that's one of those books where I talk about that book all the time.
Yeah.
I love it so much. 2 great characters, which you don't see a lot for women. And I think one of the things that I love about what Michael Cardos did in that book is, like, he took a kind of Sting or, like, any of the, like, Newman and Redford movies and then, like, made it for women. And I love that book so much. And so... difficult. Sorry, repeat the question. I got so excited that someone knew Bluff. Sorry, repeat the question.
He asks, do you have any techniques for pumping yourself up for preparing?
Oh,
What
no,
was
when
was it difficult
when a
to
book
switch
is
between
that good.
characters? Yeah.
No, when a book is that good, I'm just so excited to get in the booth.
Okay. But do you ever have routines? Like, do you have like vocal warm-up
Yeah, do you
routines
warm
and all
up?
these other things?
Yeah, sure. I'll warm up. I do this thing
Sounds like
where
you're
I like.
appeasing the people.
No, I mean, yeah. No, I do. I mean, I again, this is like a funny thing that I have with narrators because I'm very protective of my voice. I drink a ton of water, a ton of tea. I don't go out in places where I would have to shout. Like I'm crazy, and then there are other people who are just like smoking in between takes, and that's what I wrote in to thank you for listening. She's like, well, could you put the cigarette out, please?
Yeah.
It's like we're trying to do a job.
That's why your friend's like, it's personal.
Yeah, exactly. That's where they're like, I know who that is. But so for me, yeah, I'll do vocal exercises in a ritual sort of way. For certain books, I've started kind of pairing tea with the book because the smell and the taste of certain teas is kind of like a sense memory thing. It's the way an actor would be like, I don't know the character until I'm in their shoes, that kind of feel. So I sometimes will do that.
It makes sense though. And especially when you're doing this as work, right? Not just, like one book at a time. And Ryan's next question kind of alludes to this also. He says, also, one of my favorite series is the Magnitude series, which has you performing in several books. What's the mindset like returning to this world after most likely reading several books between different genres?
That's such a good question.
Yeah, exactly.
Series are hard. So I keep a running like folder on my desktop in my booth of all character voices, any character. Like there's this ongoing fantasy series that I do, the Black Witch series, and that's been now I don't even know 7-8 years, and I have just every character that is spoken, even if they don't have a name, because I'd never know if she's going to bring them back. I have a character list of clips of their voices. I will often go back and like read the end of the last book to kind of get back into it. But yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
So our friend Kamini asks, do you keep track of how many voices and accents you do per book, and how do you keep them organized?
No, in terms of numbers, no, I don't keep track of that. I have a character list, like an actual document like like a spreadsheet that I refer to, and then I've got the vocal clips. Whenever I establish a character, I clip it and save it so that I can refer to it. Because even if you're not talking about a series and like a year later, even if you're just talking about a day later, when a character comes back in after you've done 20 other characters, I need to sometimes have the refresher.
Kamini also asks, going back to my Oxford year and to the research side of things, did you have the chance to visit Oxford, or was the detail around the descriptions you were getting from the university? I was thinking the same thing for the amount of books that you referenced. This is my part of the question.
Also,
by the way.
That was a question by Ariana, my partner.
Oh, sorry, Ariana. Okay, my bad. Yeah, so Ari asks that question, and the second part, which is my addition to the question, which is, all the books that you referenced, were these, like, how did you get to referencing all the books that were being mentioned and thrown around throughout the book?
Yeah, so, Oxford was, so I spent a year in Oxford. So I knew Oxford very well, but I knew it circa 2006, 2007. And when I was in final edits for the book, I had a chance to go back. And the city had changed a bit, which was surprising to me. And so I had to rewrite some of the physical descriptions of the setting and the place. For the books, yeah, they're all stuff that I read. In fact, I'm doing an anthology collection of the poetry in my Oxford year. It's coming out on the 6th anniversary, which is April 24th, again on Audiobook. And it'll just be walking through why I chose the poems that I chose at the beginning of each chapter, and those were all things I was studying and reading when I was at Oxford. So that was a very personal connection to that book.
The descriptions of Oxford in my Oxford year are brilliant. The way you describe the classrooms and the place where the main character lives during the time, with the really, really steep staircases and the pubs with the weird privacy booths. It seems so alien, but it really felt like I was there. It was one of my favorite parts of that book.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, you go ahead, Rams.
Yeah, because you have your list of fun questions I want to end off on. But before that, one more question from Ryan. I'm curious about this too. Do you review your own work? Like listen back to your own stuff and critique yourself? Or do you have a process where you send off a critique to, people that you trust? And also, how are you with feedback? You've been doing this forever now.
Great question.
That's a good question. So yeah, when it's a book that's coming from a publisher, it's not, something I'm producing or doing myself, but when it's a book that's come from the publisher, I send files off to them and they are the ones that proof it and come back. But those are only for corrections, like things I just blatantly got wrong. I very rarely will get like character notes or feedback. Like at that point, it's kind of too late. The book's been recorded. So that's why I try to establish everything I can up front. Like I will send a 15-minute sample to publishers before I start rolling, just to be like, speak now or forever hold your peace kind of thing. So I'm very open to feedback. I mean, I had Abby Jimenez. I did Part of Your World for her a couple of years ago, and I got the dog voice wrong. Like, I didn't realize that the dog was based on her dog, and that dog has a very specific baying sound that it makes that I was not familiar with. And so she sent back to being like, I'm so sorry, but could you please do it more like this? And it's one of my funniest pickup stories in the booth because I was just sitting there and having to like do this howl. I was like, sure.
How many did you have to retake?
I mean, that dog talks a lot in that book. And the problem is that Zach Weber, my co-narrator on that, has narrated a lot of her books and knew that dog. So he got it right. So I had to like match what he was doing. And I was like, well, okay. No one told me that. I did not know. That was information I did not have.
What a weird job.
It's such a weird job. It's such a weird job.
Yeah, I have a list of, Ramya called them fun questions. I wrote it down in the script as Jacob's stupid questions.
Fun. They're fun.
Okay. Do you sit down or stand up when you record?
Sit.
Okay. I was wondering because in Thank You for Listening, the characters are standing up when they record.
Yeah, when they're recording in the studio. Yeah.
What
And some
detail?
people do. Some people have their studios oriented that way. But for me, I can't stand for that long.
Do you ever get the yips? Like, what specific things in text like trips you up?
I think when characters talk, like not clear who's talking, that'll trip me up. Like when they take out too many dialogue tags where it's unclear, that'll trip me up. Sometimes there's a really syntactically challenging sentence or something, but I've never had like, there are certain days where I've just been like, I don't feel like performing today. I will not be bringing my all to this book. And then I will just like send a note being like, sorry, like my dog ate my homework kind of note. And like, I'll get back to it tomorrow. But that's just a consideration for the book, honestly.
Yeah, but that's fair though. Do you walk away and come back to things? Like if it hasn't been your
or I
2
do a
hours?
scene where like maybe it was like super emotional and it was really emotional for me in the booth, but then I'm like, I feel like that was too much. Like I feel like that went too far. And there's always that actor conversation where it's like, yeah, but if I was feeling it, then it was authentic. And it's like, yeah, but if they can't understand what you were saying, then it kind of defeats the purpose. So I'll often revisit something.
Julia, do you speed up your books when you're listening?
I don't. I used to have very strong opinions about this, and I've mellowed with age.
Who's mellowed you?
Well, research mellowed me, which is that I used to be like, don't ever listen above 1 because that's how the narrator intended it to be done. And like, I want to hear how they wanted to perform it. But then I've seen so many people say I didn't like audiobooks until I could, I have ADHD or something. And by clicking up the speed, it now matches the speed of my brain.
Yep.
And I went, okay, never mind. I'm done bitching about this.
Yeah, it's true. I think that's something that I'll add to my argument as well about why I speed up books. Thank you.
How would you feel if I told you that Ramya listened to The Invisible Life of Addie
1.2.
LaRue at 1.7?
2.
That's fine.
That's fine.
That's
Not
fine. 2.5 freaks me out a little bit. 2.5 is like, you're not retaining anything.
No, you're not.
Like, please, this is
that's
just
why I slowed
information
down.
coming in.
You see, I've slowed down over the years because I genuinely felt that I wasn't retaining anything, even though I was getting through the books at the pace I wanted to because of the.
Also, that's a thing that's changed in the industry. I will say, when I first started, I would have a lot of directors back when I was going in studio and was directed a lot of being like, you need to slow down. Like audiobooks work at this pace, and I remember kind of rejecting that, being like, but people don't listen at that pace.
Exactly.
And I think we've, as a society, things have just gotten faster. I mean, I feel old now where I like look at a TikTok video and I'm like, that happened so fast. Like, I don't know what happened. And
wow.
and
we can speed up our
like,
TikTok videos now too, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Why?
We can. Just push it down. It'll speed
Can you
it up.
slow it down?
No, speed it up. Why are we trying to slow it down? Anyways, I feel like we're not on the same page anymore. Let's not end on this note. Julia, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
This has been an absolute fantastic conversation. We've been so looking forward to it ever since you said yes to coming on the show. So we appreciate it. We appreciate you taking our questions, our book club questions. Everyone's hyped as hell. And of course, for just telling us so much more about yourself. We love it.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Was a blast. Julia Whelan joining us on AMI Audiobook Review. You know, keep this in your favorite episode ever because it was a lot of fun. Before we go, of course, we got to shout out CELA and give you the featured titles on their homepage at the Center for Equitable Library Access, CELAlibrary.ca. The 3 featured titles up there are The Mystery Guest, Molly Maid No. 2 by Nita Prose, Suspense and Thrillers title, Oath and Honor by Liz Cheney, Politics, Government Biography. And the last one up there is The Bill Murrays by Jen Arden, Gentle Mysteries. There you go. 3 books you can check out at CELAlibrary.ca. That's it for us. Next week, we are chatting with Sarah Hillis, a super interesting topic on the rise of multi-voiced narration. That's on
that's
Know Your Narrator.
definitely a trend that's popped up
Yeah.
lately. I'm really looking forward to that one.
It's everywhere, exactly. Plus, we're going to talk to Natasha Peters, an avid audiobook worm, and that means rapid fire review. Woohoo. You can call us 1-866-509-4545 for your feedback, your questions, and everything else you want to give to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Ramya Amadin with Jacob Szymanski and Nisreen Abdel Majid. Until next episode, happy audiobook listening.